doing today? Are we good?
Pretty good.
Yeah, you guys are kind of a sleepy crowd today. Are we doing well? We're going to do some calisthenics and get you up and jumping around. Great to be with you. I'm so glad to be sharing this day with you. Part 4 of our 5-week series, Finding Your Way Back to God. And whether today is your first day with us or you've been every step of the series, I really believe God has a plan to meet with you today and already has. And we'll connect with you in this series. Some good stuff. Hey, deep inside of you, and bubbling up to the surface more often probably than you or I would really like to admit, is a deep longing, and largely a longing that is left unmet in a lot of our lives. A longing for love, a longing for meaning, a longing to find some sort of purpose in life and put your finger and my finger on what it is God wants to do with you and me. And this week, as we have worked through these 5 awakenings that are often commonplace for you and I as we find our way back to God, we arrive at this awakening of love. This reality that deeply held inside of you and I is a deep desire and a hope and a desire to understand and to experience the love of God. This reality that you probably believe at some level in your spirit, whether you're walking with Jesus or whether you feel 1,000 miles away, this hope that you have held out that maybe the love of God would change everything. And that maybe God's love manifest in a unique and special and new way in my life might just maybe change everything. Now, I really believe that when you and I encounter God's love, atmospheres shift in our soul. And yet, if I'm being perfectly honest with you, I feel what I know you have lived, in that I can meet God's love and I can be in His presence and something shifts and changes inside of me that I don't even really totally understand. But at the end of the day, I walk out of God's presence and I'm the same husband I was when I walked in. There is something else mysterious happening in the heavenlies, that I can meet with God and I can experience His powerful presence, but when I leave God's presence, if I step away from that, I still am the same husband, and I long to be a better husband and I want to be a better dad, but I'm the same guy I was when I walked in. We don't understand these mysteries of God. And so we long to, well, I'll just stay in God's presence more often, and that is absolutely the answer, of course, and that is why we long so deeply for heaven. But what do I do in the line at Starbucks? What do I do when ordering food in a restaurant? What do I do when my spouse is acting like a crazy person? There's something missing in all that. There's something mysterious that goes on with God and in His way and His time. The Apostle Paul writes to his friends at a church in Ephesus, and he's having a discourse about the love of God, and he wraps up this layer of the discourse by saying, may you experience the love of Christ, though it is too great to understand fully. Then you will be made complete with all the fullness of life and the power that comes from God. So there is something, right? There is everything to God's love in your life and mine, and that the love of Christ carries all power from God meant for you and I, and the fullness of life is only found when you and I exist in the love of God. And yet we walk around so often and hope to miraculously snap our fingers and be a different spouse or a different friend or a different sister or a different brother or a different employee or a boss. So it's in this experiencing of Christ's love that you and I are made complete with fullness. And if that's the case, there's something else to the whole equation. It's what I want to dive into today and explore a bit today. And we won't unearth every answer today, and I don't think God would want us to, but we'll toy around with a little bit. So I'm glad that you're here, and I'm glad that you're on this journey with me. Hey, if you're new with us today, I'm so glad that you're here. I know Pastor Dan's greeted you, and you probably got greeted at the door and all that, but we're really grateful that you're here, and we're very mindful that every Sunday is somebody's first Sunday at Disciples, and I love that, and I hope that's never not the case. Can I do the double negatives? I guess I have the microphone, and I just did. So that's the way that goes. There's a welcome brochure in the seat pocket around you. Grab that out, and if you're new with us or newer, That'll be a helpful tool in you acclimating your way around what makes us tick and all that. And I know Pastor Sean will mention it at the close today, but we also have our newcomers luncheon today. We do these about quarterly. And the idea is to just gather people who are either here from their first time or maybe you've been coming 20 weeks and haven't been yet. And I get to spend an hour with you, and some of our staff and leaders will be there as well, and just kind of tell the story of disciples and help you meet other newcomers and just connect. It's only an hour, lunch provided, so I hope you'll join me for that today at 1 o'clock. Good stuff happening. Hey, grab your smartphone out if you haven't already. And be sure, if you're a Facebook user, go to Facebook, check in. If you've been around any period of time, you know that we have stopped sending money to Mark Zuckerberg. He's got plenty. Amen? If you don't know who Mark is, he's the owner or CEO or whatever, major stockholder of Facebook. And so as a church, like many others, we used to do some advertising on Facebook and spend a little bit of money sponsoring posts to help get the word out about disciples. And then it hit us one day, what if we asked the people of Disciples Church to be our advertisers, and then we take that money we were using and we actually do some really cool stuff with it. So that's what we're doing these days. So every 2 check-ins this month, we can afford to pay for 1 meal for a kid in need in an underdeveloped nation. And so great thing. Tag as many people as you want. Every tag counts as another check-in. And check in on Facebook. And if you're hesitating to check in on Facebook, just stare at those faces and then just tell me, I don't want kids to eat. I'm just kidding. I did that in the first service and people just cringe. And so I just like it. So I'm just going to make you cringe just a little bit, you know. So anyway, check in if you're up for that and willing to. You got your phone out, so let's turn in the scriptures if you would. We're going to be in Luke 19 today. And if you brought your phone or if you brought your Bible on your phone, great. Glad you did that. You can download an app that's free called YouVersion, give you a lot of different versions of the Bible, or maybe you even brought a printed copy of the scriptures. Yes, they still exist. Great to have you. Luke 19. Would you pray with me? And we'll get started. Heavenly Father, these moments belong to you solely. We do them for you and to you and through you and in you, as are all things. So speak to us now, God, as you have spoken your truth to us through song, through prayer, through the power of your Spirit, through those gentle nudges that you provide us throughout this day. And now as we land and spend some time in your scriptures, continue to move in power in our midst. We trust you, Jesus. In Christ's name, amen. So today is one of those talks that I give a couple of times a year where I feel like the old guy in the room. And I'm really glad to look around and see that there's people in the room that are older than me still. I love you. Thank you. First service, we had a whole bunch of people older than me, and I love you, and you make me so happy when you're here. Because today is one of those days where I give the dad talk. I just feel today is the right time to give one of those dad talks. So if you are older than me, maybe you're even old enough to be my mom or dad, I'm trusting on your grace as you look at me and go, oh goodness, kid, I could be your parent. You're not my dad, but God's put me in a position of spiritual father in here. And so we're going to give kind of the dad talk today, and it's a good one. And I think you're going to leave here really encouraged. Friday night in this very room, we had a night of worship, and it was pretty phenomenal. It was just an amazing time. Raise your hand if you were here for that. Give me a sense for who was here and who wasn't. Okay, so I'm going to guess about half the room was here, half the room wasn't. And if you're part of the family here and you weren't here Friday, you were here in spirit. You were with us. We missed you, of course, but some just tremendous things happened on Friday. We sang, we prayed. Some of you who are fitter than me jumped. I tried, and then I felt body parts moving even after I wasn't jumping anymore, and I decided, God, I'm not going to jump anymore until I lose some weight. So I don't know if anybody else felt that. That was me trying to jump. Some of you were dancing, and some of you that never dance in church started dancing in church, and I thought that was awesome. And some of you that shout and never shout in church, shouted in church, and that gave my heart great warmth. And just to see us emote as a people, and we sang, and we prayed, and we clapped, and we cried. God's presence was thick, and the comfort of his joy was powerful in this place. And my deepest heart was to kind of climb up on stage at the end of the night, and in the most spiritual terms I could, tell you to go all together in groups and go eat ice cream together, because it was just like, you know what I mean? Like, you just have those moments in life where you're like, can we just go get an ice cream cone and just like keep the joy and the sweetness of what happened? It was a powerful, and it was a great night. And so as dad around here to some extent, I just want to call out a few things that I saw that night. I had a really, really unique perspective Friday night because I didn't have any responsibilities Friday. Friday's my Sabbath, and so I was unplugged all day, and I didn't have a phone on, and I didn't look at a screen all day, and Jen and I goofed off together and had lunch and held hands and went for a walk and looked at birds and, kissed in public and didn't think of any of you at all the entire time, and yet I love you with all my heart. It was a great day. And so we rolled in Friday night with no responsibilities, just kind of footloose and fancy free, and I had a baseball cap on and a t-shirt in church. What? And so we kind of slotted into one of the very back rows over on your right-hand side, and just got a great perspective. And it was a good thing for me to not have any responsibilities and to just be a spiritual father in the room and to just kind of watch. More on that a little bit later. But here's some things that I saw. And I think it's important on moments like this as a body that we just pause on a mountain and say, I saw that. I saw that. I think something happens when we just call out what has happened in our midst and just recognize that God did something new in us. And so I want to call out a few of those things that maybe you saw, maybe you didn't. I saw them, and there was more that happened than I saw. I don't have a special direct line to God that you don't, but I do care for you in a special way. I saw deep love for one another, and I saw connection and sacrifice. The Apostle Paul had a way of calling out people, both for good and bad, and calling them out by name in letters. If you've ever read some of those letters and he calls people out by name, it's a little awkward. But I think that there's an important time and place to do that, and today is one of them. And so one of the things that I saw on Friday was Ashley Krause with deep love and sacrifice. She is, and forgive me using this word, but I use it on purpose. She is a lot of the time trapped in a kid's room while you and I get to hang out together and worship. And she makes that sacrifice very willingly. I've never heard her complain. I've never heard her grumble about it. And so Friday night, she didn't have to be trapped in a kid's room. In fact, as you know, Pastor Dan and Ash have stepped out of children's ministry, are now just leading youth ministry and family ministries. And so she didn't even have any direct responsibilities in kids ministry. And she came in expectant. I gave her a hug, and I was all excited Friday. Oh man, Ashley gets to be in service and sing and worship. And I don't know if you've noticed, but you guys all have a lot of babies. You just keep pumping them out. I don't know what's going on, but you got a lot of kids. And she walked by the nursery at one point. We had nursery workers in there, but she walked by at one point and just saw like babies climbing on top of babies on top of babies. And she didn't say anything to anybody, but something shifted in her. And she just willingly jumped over that little fence and entered baby jail and loved babies all night. And you may not have even noticed it. You may not have even seen it. But guys, something in the atmosphere shifts when the people of God see something like that and go, I'm laying down my rights to serve and to be a missionary in this minute. And to see that happen with no pomp or circumstance, with no grumbling or kicking the wall, with no whining afterwards, with no overtures in the lobby after the fact. Well, how was the worship night? I was in caring for your children. None of that. I saw deep love and sacrifice. And it's some of that stuff you can't put your finger on, but atmospheres shift when our people do that, and when you do that, and when I do that. I saw freedom unleashed. I saw people, like I mentioned, dancing that don't usually dance, and people clapping that don't usually clap. And I saw people jumping who I wasn't sure their knees would hold. I thought, you're getting up there. You probably shouldn't be jumping like that. Doug talks. He's not here today. He's off. So he's in Hawaii, so I'm going to make fun of him the entire hour. I saw transforming humility on Friday night. It was a moment in the night, by no invitation. Nobody said anything, at least not that I remember, and I was in the room when I looked up from worship and I saw the whole front of the room, and a bunch of chairs were gone, and so there was a bunch of room up here, and I saw this space filled with people in their 50s and 60s with their hands up worshiping. And it was everything I could do to not weep. See, you may not have caught it, but God just gave me a little picture in that moment of what was happening. And the fact that these songs, Ken and Rebecca, I know they're not your songs. I get it. I realize that. And for the other 50s and 60s in the room, I get that these songs aren't your songs. I mean, I'm not even 40 yet, and I kept waiting to sing I Could Sing of Your Love Forever. I was like, where's the Delirious up in here? Like, when are we going to sing some Third Day? There was no Third Day at all. I thought Mac Powell was leading worship in heaven. That was what I was told when I came to faith. I kept waiting for Keith Green to make an appearance on the piano, and he was not here at all. We need more Ashleys in the room. Not because you're lacking, not because you're not doing it, but I just want to call that out. We need more Ashleys in the room who drop everything and say, I sacrifice willingly my rights for the better of the family. We need more freedom and unleashed craziness for God in this place. We need a little less dignity. And I love to make fun of millennials because I'm finally not the youngest guy in the room. But millennials, you got to stop working so hard to be so cool all the time. Like, all right, It's like, I got the tattoo perfect on my arm, so when I raise my arm, everyone can read it. Jesus. You know you did it. Come on. Don't lie to me. It's like, no, wait, when I raise my hand, is it going to read just right? We need more Ken and Rebecca's in the room who stood up in front and didn't just sing songs that probably aren't their songs. I know I'm putting words in your mouth, but just play along for the hour. I'll pay you later. Who sang songs that probably aren't their songs, but they also, and this is the more powerful part of the humility piece, they followed leadership from people who could be their kids. And they willingly said, I'll follow you into God's presence. And there's probably times all over this joint where the 50s and 60s in our church look at all of us and go, I could be your parent. Like, you poor kids, you're making that mistake, or you should do this. And yet the humility in this room that night, and the humility in our body, was just on display for all to see Friday night, as the altar was crammed full of 50s and 60s with their hands up, clapping and jumping and following the leadership of people who could be their kids. It was beautiful, church. And we need to recognize that's happening. We need to call that out, and we need to understand that that's part of the culture here now. And not because like we set out for. We didn't write that on a vision sheet. Like, we got to get the 50s and 60s to raise our hands in worship. How do we do that, Jason? Lastly, I saw the enemy at work. And again, I hope that doesn't sound creepy or weird, but I just did. I came in contact with it. I saw divisions in our room. I saw people who came in and wanted to complain and grumble. There are still people, even in our church, which is a church full of joy, that are convinced that their spiritual gift is to make everyone else sad. I don't know where you're getting that from, but this is sort of complaining and grumbling, and I caught wind of it in a few different spots throughout the night, and just in my spirit prayed against that and said, Lord, don't let the enemy get a root in here. Don't let the enemy get a root. I saw divisions. I literally had some people pull me aside and want to have conversations with me so that they could badmouth some of you and tell me how bad you are. And it was just, there was a weird vibe of that, and had to shut that down and do some rebuking, and did it all with a baseball cap. So apparently you can still be a pastor while you wear a baseball cap. So that's cool. Glad to learn that. These are the things I saw on Friday. And I don't have a whole lot to say other than that. On that topic, but these are the things that I saw at work. I saw envy, and I saw love, and I saw power grab, and I saw humility. I saw sacrifice, and I saw people fighting for their rights. You see all that little microcosm in our time together, and it was a powerful night, and I believe a turning point in the life of our church as we look at some doors that got opened up on Friday night. It was a beautiful, beautiful time. And so, of course, I had a special seat on Friday night because I didn't have to be pastor. I just got to be Stu and friend. And yet, the reality is I'm not the first short guy with a whole bunch of sin in his life who ever got a bird's eye view of what Jesus was doing in a room. So if you're with me, look at Luke chapter 19, and let's look at another guy named Zacchaeus who got a really close picture of what Jesus was doing in a room. Beginning in verse 1. Jesus entered Jericho and made his way through the town, and there was a man there named Zacchaeus. He was the chief tax collector in the region, and he had become very rich. Let me stop and pause there just to kind of anchor in together to be sure we're all together on this, that tax collectors in that culture were hated. They were disliked. Tomorrow's tax day. They're still that way, right? You're sending your taxes in tomorrow, and how many of you have to pay money, and so you've waited till tomorrow to send it in because you're not stoked about it? Tax people are not the most popular people in the room. I doubt tomorrow on tax day that there'll be many people wearing t-shirts around town that say, I work for the IRS, cruising Starbucks. You got to keep that one under grid, right? Fly that one under radar. And not only is this guy the chief tax collector, he's furthermore has become very rich being a tax collector, which by a real cursory glance at the cultural studies of that day, we can know that only happens from extortionism. So this guy got really rich by collecting taxes and ripping people off. He's trying to get a look at Jesus in verse 3, but he was too short, I feel your pain, Zacchaeus, to see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and he climbed a sycamore fig tree beside the road, for Jesus was going to pass that way. When Jesus came by, verse 5, he looked up at Zacchaeus and he called him by name. Zacchaeus, quick, come down. I must be a guest in your home today. Now, I don't know how many of you grew up around church. How many are already humming the song, Zacchaeus was a wee little, okay, you feeling it? All right, I want to just sort of release that because I've been humming it all week, and I want it to land on you and not come back to me, okay? Because I've been singing the wee little man garbage all week long. If you didn't grow up around church, you don't know the song, you should be so glad right now you didn't pick up that little piece of whatever we call that stuff. So maybe next door they're singing Zacchaeus was a wee little man. I don't know. I'll point out a few realities as you and I hold in context what happened here Friday, what I believe God is up to in the life of Disciples Church. And the first of that is this, that God's love is experienced in welcoming his presence. God's love is experienced in welcoming his presence. That there are aspects of your life and there are aspects of my life that remain a long way off from God. You know it and I know it. And maybe the answer for you has been, well, God loves me where I'm at. Yes, he does. Or maybe the answer for you has been, well, maybe God doesn't actually care. Yeah, you know better. Or maybe the answer is, I don't care what you think, God. I'm staying far from you in this aspect of my life. But here's the tension with that, is that we have one area like that, and then we add more and more and more. And before we know it, the only areas in our life are areas that are a long way off from God. And I'm convinced that God's love is experienced when we welcome his presence. I'm convinced that God's rich love in your life and mine is only experienced in fullness when you and I welcome his presence into our life. Now, it's not to say that God will not be the first to reach out. He looks at Zacchaeus up in the tree. He says, Zacchaeus, I must be a guest in your home tonight. And don't miss the power of that. I mean, you can imagine if you made $50,000 more a year than you make. Just play along for 1 second. You don't say anything out loud. You'll be embarrassed. $50,000 more. I bet if I gave you 2 minutes and said, what would you do with the money if you had to spend it? I bet one of the top things you would do is some sort of improvement to your house. Right? Come on. I'd put rock on the countertops. I want that granite. Gotta have it, right? New cabinets. I'd just kick my kids out, and then my house would be a lot nicer. It'd be so much nicer if they were just not in there. Oh, whoops, sorry. So you got the Zacchaeus guy who's made a killing, grown very wealthy. And I have to assume, I don't know this, it's just your friend talking right now, but I have to assume that his home would have been a reflection of that unholy wealth. That his home would have been a beautiful display of his crimes against humanity. And so Jesus says to him, invite me into your mess. I want to be present with you. Invite me in. I've got to get into your house today. Because something's going to shift. Something's going to change when I'm in the presence of that. Something will shift. And if you don't believe me yet, wait till we get to the next verses because we see it shift. And Jesus doesn't have to say anything. The text doesn't give us any indication that Jesus prodded, poked, convicted, claimed, yelled, accused, anything. He just owns up to it. God's love is experienced in welcoming his presence. This is why we love worship night, because we welcome his presence and we experience his love. And if you're anything like me, you walked out of Friday night and one of the first things on your mind was, man, I can't wait to do that again, right? When are we doing the next one of those? Which is, I think, beautiful. It'd be a bummer if we did it at worship night and said, hey, that was a good stab. Let's not ever do that again, right? Awkward. But here's the thing. One of the pursuits that ought to be and could be central in your life and mine is the pursuit of God's presence all the time. Because if we leave it up to Jason and the band, we put them on the pedestal. We make them the glorifiers. We say, Jason and band, you got to do another Friday night like that. Man, that was all the way you strung those first 4 songs together. Man, do another one of those. That was great, man. You really created a space for God to show up. And God's going, really? I actually made him. I don't need him. And you and I are both very grateful to have Jason and the band. And we're so thankful to have great leadership. But it's not about getting the next one of those on the calendar. It's about getting his presence on our lives. Amen. And the thing is the greatest area of God's presence lacking in your life is the areas that you're the furthest from God. So maybe for you, the worship thing and singing songs comes really naturally. And maybe the area that God would love to pour his love out in your life is the very area you keep God far. And God says, hey, that was an awesome worship night. Wasn't that amazing to feel my love? Imagine if you felt my love in the same way in your marriage that you gave up on. Well, wasn't that amazing Friday night when you felt my presence move? What if you invited me into your finances and sensed my love in your finances like you did in those songs? You get the gist. Could go right down the line. That time of worship, we sang what I think has kind of become an anthem for our church this year, that song, No Longer Slaves. And the band led us in that beautifully, and it was powerful. And Doug came up because we sing that line, I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. And Doug came up and got his whoop on. Have you ever seen Doug get his whoop on like that? Is that what it's called? I think that's the technical term. That was fun, man. That was awesome. Nope, apparently that's not the term. Okay, never mind. Who let the mainliner in the room? So Doug comes up and he challenges us to pray, I'm no longer a slave to whatever it is in your life. Fill in the blank. I'm no longer a slave to greed. I'm no longer a slave to lust. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I'm no longer a slave to you fill in the blank to what enslaves you. And say, I am a child of God. Those are the areas that I think God longs to pour his love out on your life. And to welcome his presence into those areas. So here's the reality, and I don't mean for this to sound flippant or quippy, but God doesn't do Skype. He just does in person and present. He's not really interested in Skyping in. He's not really interested in conference calling into your life. He'd really like to either be there or say, I'm a gentleman, I won't force my way onto you. God's love is experienced when you and I welcome his presence. And if you're not convinced yet, think back. You don't have to turn there, but think back to Genesis 18 and Abraham. Abraham's been given this promise that he'll have a child, and the promise hasn't been fulfilled yet. And a stranger comes into his life, and he receives the stranger, offers bread and water, and then finds out that it's God that he has just entertained. And he's given the announcement that Sarah will have a child. And see, something shifted in the presence of God. Something changed in the presence. When the presence is invited in, something changes. And we get these pictures on earth of how that works out in our earthly relationships, and that's beautiful and true. But in all of that, I believe God's going, hey, that's the bigger picture. That's me in your life. Oh, was that one not enough? Remember the story of Elijah. 1 Kings, I think it's chapter 17. Fact check me if you want. 1 Kings 17, and Elijah encounters the widow at the Z town. I can't pronounce. I think it's Zarephath. And she has just enough oil and flour to make one last round of bread. And then her intention is to eat one last meal with her son and lay down and die. And yet she gives it to Elijah. And then she realizes she's in the presence of greatness. That Elijah's got an anointing on him like maybe no one else on earth before Jesus. And Elijah blesses her with abundance. You get in the presence of that which is godly, and atmosphere shift. And then you arrive at the Emmaus Road in Luke chapter 24, and these travelers have been traveling, and they welcome in a stranger and give shelter overnight, and then realize the next day they've broken bread with Jesus himself. That in the presence of God, atmospheres shift. Atmospheres shift, and soil is cultivated. But here's the reality. You and I leave those atmospheres, and we're the same person we were when we walked in. We have to commit to the training process that takes place afterwards. We have to commit to saying, that was such a rich time in your presence, God. I want that all the time. I want to learn to practice your presence in that. I want to learn to practice your presence with my money and with my relationships and with my secret life and with my thought life and with my employees. I want to look like Jesus with skin on in all of those different moments. Psalm 100 says, acknowledge that the Lord is God. He made us, and we are his. We are his people, the sheep of his pasture. Enter his presence. Enter his gates with thanksgiving. Go into his courts with praise. So we enter in with thanksgiving, knowing that when we meet in the presence of God, something shifts. But that's not the whole story, right? Look at verse 6. Because there's the experiencing God's presence, experiencing God's love, but then there's expressing God's love. And you and I cannot encounter a missionary God. Missio Dei is not the mission of God. That's just not true. That's not even how the language is translated. The Missio Dei is missionary God. That's how it would be translated in our current language. So we cannot encounter a missionary God and then expect to not be sent out as missionaries. Sheep begat sheep, right? So God, we encounter him, and then look what happens, right? So Zacchaeus quickly climbs down the tree, took Jesus into his house in great excitement and joy. But the people were displeased. He's gone to be the guest of a notorious sinner, and they grumbled. And this gives you and I a really somber moment to pause. And maybe you even need to say it out loud. Church people ruin everything. We just do. We ruin everything when we act like church people. This guy, 1,000 miles from God, hiding in a tree because he's so despised, he couldn't even weave his way through the crowd to meet the Messiah. And the Messiah picks him out of a tree and says, I've got to get in your house today. And they go, well, why not me? How come? Well, but what about me? I didn't. And they grumble. And they complain. The room was really cold today. Couldn't even meet with God. Did you see that person sitting in my chair? Where are the donuts? Why are there donuts? I mean, right? You can't win them. Stinking sprinkles, man. I'm telling you, sprinkles are the death of me. Sprinkles are proof that the devil is real and active in the world. The people were displeased and they grumbled. Verse 8, meanwhile, Zacchaeus stood before the Lord. Meanwhile, right? So some time passes. And Zacchaeus stands before the Lord and says, I will give half of my wealth to the poor. And if I have cheated people on their taxes, I will give them back 4 times as much. If you do some digging around the Old Testament, you're going to find this in Numbers, I believe. I know you're going to find it in Deuteronomy and Leviticus. You're going to find this Old Testament law that if a tax collector rips somebody off on their taxes, the greatest penalty for that extortion is a 4-time repayment. This was the greatest level of punishment that was leveled in society, in Jewish culture. So don't miss this. Don't miss what happens. Zacchaeus, right, a tax collector in a Jewish culture, rises up and realizes the greatest punishment that could be leveled against me for the sins I've committed are a 4-time repayment. I'm going to offer it before it's taken. I lay down my rights. Maybe Jesus would find out I've been ripping these people off and only make me pay 20%, but no. I'm going to offer to pay 4 times. You know what? Actually, it's my turn to be in the room and sing the songs. I put in my time with the kids. You know what? No, I'll go in the nursery. I'll take care of it. I got it. My name is Ashley, and I'm a disciple of Jesus. And an atmosphere shifted. Something changed spiritually in the room when that happened. I didn't see it happen. I wasn't watching it. I don't have supernatural X-ray, Superman Jesus eyes. But I'll tell you, something shifted in that moment. Jesus said, these people want to go after me. These people will make a sacrifice. I'm going to pour myself out on them. And then minutes later, a bunch of 50s and 60s who had every reason to say, these aren't my songs, these aren't my people, this ain't my room. What, are they meeting in a strip mall? Don't they know what a church looks like? These weirdos. There's not a cross in the building. What's their problem? Nothing. Up to the front, hands up, we're worshiping Jesus. Something shifts. Something shifts. And Zacchaeus says, I'll pay 4 times. And look at Jesus' response. If you've been with us for this study through Romans, we'll pick it back up later this summer and finish out the book of Romans. But we've been talking about this Abrahamic covenant and this reality that you and I live under the promise that God made with Abraham. And the promise was very simple. The promise was this: I will bless you and pour my spirit out on you. And I will make your descendants as numerous as the sand on the seashore. And in response, you will be a blessing to the entire world. Missionary God, missionary people. So you and I, we can't step into the presence of God and simply leave that time and say, well, I want to do that again. That's great. I want to do that again too. Let's do that again. You want to do that again? Let's do it again. But it can't just be that. It can't just be I want to consume more of God's presence. We end up being the kid at the Thanksgiving table fighting over the last drumstick. Instead, the picture Jesus gives us in Scripture over and over again, in even this gospel of Luke in chapter 14, I believe, is the people of God leave the table, go out to the highways and byways, and find everyone they can find who might be hungry for a meal and bring them back to the party. This is the picture of following Jesus. And so we get in the presence of God and it shifts atmospheres. But it doesn't shift you and I until we accept the call as a missionary people and go out as missionaries. To the glory of God for the sake of the world. To the glory of God for the sake of the world. If it was just to the glory of God, we'd give our lives to Jesus and zip up to heaven, because glory of God will be awesome in heaven. I'm not sure of much in heaven, but there will be lots of pistachio ice cream. It will be calorie-free, and we'll give God glory. Maybe not in that order, but just run with me on that one, okay? Don't burst my bubble on the pistachio ice cream thing. God's love is expressed when we release control. So God's love is experienced when we invite his presence. God's love is released. God's love is expressed when we release control. So the greatest expression of God's love in your life, and hear me on this, this will be a tough one. Hear me on this. The greatest expression of God's love in your life will not be with your hands in the air singing a song. It will be your hands around somebody releasing control. That's the greatest expression of God's love you can ever give, the release of control. Well, Stu, you don't understand how hard I've worked for my money. You don't understand how badly I'm trying to save for retirement. You don't understand how much my husband hates coming to church with me. You don't understand. And we go, God, I release control so that your love can be expressed more fully in my life. Something shifts in the atmosphere when we get in God's presence. But you and I are left unchanged until his love is released in our life. And that only happens when we release control. And we say, it's not mine anymore. When Zacchaeus says, I got all this money and I'm giving it all away, or at least half of it. And Jesus says, you're a true son of Abraham. So the implication is, you get the covenant. You got it, Zacchaeus. You understand the covenant that you live under. Meanwhile, all the religious types are going, well, why does he get to have dinner with Jesus? They don't understand the promise. He understands the promise. I want to invite the band to join me up here. Kind of bring this time together to a close. Friday night, we had a tremendous time. It was a powerful experience to be together. And while experiencing God's love and enjoying God's presence, it ignites some fires in you and I that cannot be ignited any other way. And God's call on you and I in his presence will never merely be limited to consume more of his presence. You are not called to be a consumer of God's presence. You're called to be an image bearer of Christ's name. And so his presence shifts us and changes something in us. And his presence is here, and his presence is in your car driving to work in traffic, screaming at the guy in front of you. But you and I are not called merely to just consume more of him and enjoy that and say, that was so sweet. Let's do it again, Jason. Can you reprise that experience? That puts a pressure and that puts a mantle on our worship band and our worship leaders that God never intended them to carry. They give us a foretaste of what is to be. And those experiences that we had on Friday, which were powerful, are designed to be the kinds of experiences you feel when you act like a disciple with your money and with your spouse and with your kids and with your employees and with your boss. It's the same. It's all this adoring of God, and your desire to find your way back to God in those ways will be the same thing that helps those far from God draw their way back to God as they see you with skin on behaving like Jesus would behave. You see, the reality is, in your life and mine, there's about 8 to 15 people in your life that God has supernaturally and strategically placed in your path, whose only opportunity on earth to experience the love of God will be through you. They're not going to walk in here right away. They might not know anybody else in their life who follows Jesus. And you're the only point of contact they have. So when you arrive into work, you're presented with an opportunity with that coworker to be the love of Jesus and the joy of the Father and the hope of the presence of the Spirit in all of those moments. This shifts everything. I sit on the side of a soccer field now, and I sit next to families who travel with us in our kids' soccer games, who I have no context to know them outside of soccer. And I want to jump up and I want to scream at the ref who keeps missing the handball calls. Call it! And then the Spirit whispers to me and says, you're the only access that guy has to see Jesus today, probably. Will you take the opportunity? Will you help him find his way back to God? And so instead I go, hey, I was right. I'm not the only one who saw it. It was a terrible call, right? Horrible, right? Yeah, okay, good. Good, I'm glad. Could you stand up and scream? That would really help me out a little bit, if you could do that. I literally said that yesterday. He's like, yeah, it's not really my style. I said, that is really my style. So I'm not sure how this is going to work out for you and me. And he said, please don't stand up and scream. That'll be weird. Okay, deal. You and I are image bearers. And the greatest opportunity we have to find our way back to God is sometimes helping others find their way back to God. I don't know exactly your next steps with Jesus. I don't know what those will look like. I don't know what sacrifices you'll have to make. I don't know what tree you're going to have to climb down from or what you're going to have to give away to the poor. I don't know your life as intimately as you may think I do. But here's what I do know is that the next step in that is as simple as ABC. Living it out is complex and difficult, but the next steps are as simple as ABC. To say, Jesus, I admit I'm not where I'd like to be in this area of my life. I believe that there's so much more. I believe that you would long to do so much more in the midst. I know that you would hope for my life to echo your goodness to all the world. And I got to confess, God, it doesn't echo. So I believe that can only be done through the power of your Spirit. And then to simply commit to the next step and to not expect for, well, I'll just get in God's presence one more time and something magical will happen. It won't. It's just not gonna. God's gonna count on you to take your next step with him and to say, God, I commit that I'm gonna take the next step in that. I'm gonna have a conversation with my spouse. I'm gonna confess that sin. I'm gonna commit to whatever that next step is. Would you stand with me? And we're gonna let it echo together this morning. Sing this song through a few different times in a few different ways, I trust. And provide the opportunity to respond back to God. We're satisfied, but we're desperate for more. We're desperate for more of your presence, God, in the darkest recesses of our hearts. Speak to us as we worship, God. Speak to us as we walk with you. Let it echo. Let it echo.